Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Role models play an important part in all of our lives, whether we seek them out or not. And whether we walk the Buddhist path or not, they can have the power to shape the direction we take and the ability to influence the decisions that flow on from there. Life, with its ebbs and flows, challenges and opportunities, and at every turn we often seek wise counsel, examples that we can follow, and emulate people that we can respect or look up to, and much, much more. On the Buddhist path, the Buddha, for all intents and purposes, is our most eminent role model, teacher, and the Perfectly Enlightened One. There are also many noble and great disciples of the Buddha, those who have ordained as well as lay people, who were commended and praised by the Buddha for different qualities and or aspects of their practice. This will be a recurring segment on the podcast, where we ask who are our role models, and feature some of these great disciples of the Buddha. The aim is to learn about these noble beings and delight in their lives and accomplishments, learn from them, highlight the importance of recognizing them as noteworthy role models, and as inspiration towards the Noble Eightfold Path. Today we're looking at Ghatikara the potter, and we briefly touched on his story when we looked at non-returners and the Pure Abodes, so Anagamis and the Suddhavasa. But what we know about Ghatikara is that he lived during the time of Kassapa Buddha, and he was a non-returner, and he had a very unique and significant relationship with Kassapa Buddha. In fact, he was the Aga Upatak, so he was the chief attendant or main follower, main supporter of Kassapa Buddha, and he was held in very high regard. And so we hear from Kassapa Buddha about the noble qualities of Ghatikara, and there's much we can learn and aspire to in terms of his actions and the way that he lived his life. We also learn from the life of Gotama Buddha, the chronicles, that it was as a deva he came to offer the 8 requisites to Prince Siddhartha when he renounced the palace life to become an ascetic. And then we also see in the suttas that he came to visit Gotama Buddha later on to speak with him and to honor the friendship, their past friendship, and to tell the Buddha of the bhikkhus who had been reborn into the Aviha realm. So there's much that we can learn from his story, and much of it is actually quite joyful and heartwarming. So let's begin. The main sutta featuring the story of Ghatikara appears in the middle-length discourses, so Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 81. And the Buddha is wandering among the Kosalans and comes to a place where Kassapa Buddha once taught, and where in a previous birth he was Jotipāla, friend of Ghatikara. And the Buddha recounts to Venerable Ananda the story of Ghatikara, who was the chief attendant and supporter of Kassapa Buddha. And so he goes on to give the story of Jotipāla, the bodhisatta, and how he had to be dragged by his friend Ghatikara to visit Kassapa Buddha to hear the Dhamma, and how he subsequently ordained. And we also hear about the noble qualities of Ghatikara as well. So let's firstly look at this story of Ghatikara and Jotipāla. And so the sutta says, once Ananda, in this place there was a prosperous and busy market town called Vebalinga, with many inhabitants and crowded with people. Back then, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, lived near the market town Vebalinga. It was here, in fact, that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, had his monastery. It was here, in fact, that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, resided and advised the Sangha of bhikkhus. In Vebalinga, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, had as a supporter, as his chief attendant and supporter, a potter named Ghatikara. Ghatikara the potter had as a friend, as his close friend, a Brahmin student named Jotipāla. One day, the potter Ghatikara addressed the Brahmin student Jotipāla thus: "My dear Jotipāla, let us go and see the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. I hold that it is good to see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." The Brahmin student Jotipāla replied, "Enough, my dear Ghatikara, what is the use of seeing that bald-pated recluse? A second and third time the potter Ghatikara said, "My dear Jotipāla, let us go and see the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened." And a second and a third time the Brahmin student Jotipāla replied, "Enough, my dear friend Ghatikara. What is the use of seeing that bald-pated recluse?" Potter Ghatikara then said, "Then, my dear Jotipāla, let us take a loofah and bath powder and go to the river to bathe." "Very well," Jotipāla replied. So the potter Ghatikara and the Brahmin student Jotipāla went to the river to bathe. So the potter Ghatikara and the Brahmin student Jotipāla took a loofah and bath powder and went to the river to bathe. Then Ghatikara said to Jotipāla, "My dear Jotipāla, there is the monastery of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, quite nearby. Let us go and see the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. I hold that it is good to see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." Jotipāla replied, "Enough, my dear Ghatikara. What is the use of seeing that bald-pated recluse?" A second and a third time Ghatikara said, "My dear Jotipāla, there is the monastery of the Blessed One Kassapa." And a second and a third time the Brahmin student Jotipāla replied, "Enough, my dear Ghatikara. What is the use of seeing that bald-pated recluse?" Then the potter Ghatikara seized the Brahmin student Jotipāla by the belt and said, "My dear Jotipāla, there is the monastery of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, quite nearby. Let us go and see the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. I hold that it is good to see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." Then the Brahmin student Jotipāla undid his belt and said, "Enough, my dear Ghatikara. What is the use of seeing that bald-pated recluse?" Then, when the Brahmin student Jotipāla had washed his head, the potter Ghatikara seized him by the hair and said, "My dear Jotipāla, there is the monastery of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, quite nearby. Let us go and see the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. I hold that it is good to see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." Then the Brahmin student Jotipāla thought, "It is wonderful, it is marvelous that this potter Ghatikara, who is of a different birth, should presume to seize me by the hair when we have washed our heads. Surely this can be no simple matter." And he said to the potter Ghatikara, "You go as far as this, my dear Ghatikara." "I go as far as this, my dear Jotipāla, for so much do I hold that it is good to see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." "Then, my dear Ghatikara, let go of me. Let us visit him." So Ghatikara the potter and Jotipāla the Brahmin student went to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. Ghatikara, after paying homage to him, sat down at one side, while Jotipāla exchanged greetings with him, and when this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he too sat down at one side. Ghatikara then said to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, "Venerable Sir, this is the Brahmin student Jotipāla, my friend, my close friend. Let the Blessed One teach him the Dhamma." Then the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, instructed, urged, roused, and gladdened Ghatikara the potter and Jotipāla the Brahmin student with an exposition of the Dhamma. At the conclusion of the exposition, having delighted and rejoiced in the Blessed One Kassapa's words, they rose from their seats, and after paying homage to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, keeping him on their right, they departed. Then Jotipāla asked Ghatikara, "Now that you have heard this Dhamma, my dear Ghatikara, why don't you go forth from the home life into homelessness?" "My dear Jotipāla, don't you know that I support my blind and aged parents?" "Then, my dear Ghatikara, I shall go forth from the home life into homelessness." So Ghatikara the potter and Jotipāla the Brahmin student went to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened. After paying homage to him, they sat down at one side, and Ghatikara the potter said to the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, "Venerable Sir, this is the Brahmin student Jotipāla, my friend, my close friend. Let the Blessed One give him the going forth." And the Brahmin student Jotipāla received the going forth from the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, and he received the full admission. So there's a few things that are very interesting from this account that is given by Gotama Buddha to Venerable Ananda about Ghatikara and Jotipāla. So the first thing is about the friendship between Jotipāla and Ghatikara. You can see that Ghatikara holds the friendship to a very high degree. So they clearly follow different spiritual paths, But Ghatikara says that he's a dear friend, a close friend, and so you can see to the extent that he goes to in order to help his friend. And what we find at the end of the sutta is actually that the Buddha, Gotama Buddha, reveals that he is the one who was Jotipāla at the time of Kassapa Buddha. And so what's quite amazing for most people when you hear this story is that the bodhisatta didn't want to go and see the Buddha. And that's quite remarkable because one often assumes that in all lives the bodhisatta always inclines towards seeing a Buddha. And in this case it's not true. You can see how much it takes for Ghatikara to pull Jotipāla to see Kassapa Buddha. And it's interesting when he talks about seizing him by the head. In certain cultures, touching someone's head is not considered to be a good thing. It's a breach of etiquette, a breach of the norm. And that's why when Jotipāla says or exclaims that you've done something so significant in order to pull me to see the Buddha, it must be for good reason. It's because it's very unusual for someone to grab you by the head or the hair. What's interesting about Jotipāla is that after he ordains, what happens is we don't really hear much more. And the reason for that is because when bodhisattas go forth under a Buddha, they purify their virtue, they learn the Buddha's teachings, and they practice the spiritual life with meditation, and they develop insight into things. But they only develop it to the point of what they call anuloma jnana. So this is only up to a point. So they don't make any effort towards developing path and fruit, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to continue the bodhisatta training or development in order to become a Buddha. So those are the things that are quite interesting. But you can see the significance of what a sappurisa, a good person, Ghatikara is. He's clearly very suvacca, so very willing to be instructed by the Buddha, has tremendous amount of confidence and conviction in the Buddha, and he is someone that doesn't want his friend to fail. He goes to the extent of pulling him by the belt, dragging him by the hair, and being very adamant about it. The sutta goes on to talk about Kassapa Buddha moving on from Vepalinga, so he stayed there as long as he wished, and then he set forward and wandered towards Benares. And he eventually arrived at Benares, and then he went to live in the deer park at Isipatana. And King Kiki of Kasi heard that the Buddha was staying there, and so he went to visit him. And after visiting him and hearing the Dhamma from the Buddha, he invited the Buddha and the Sangha for the next day meal. And after the next day, he prepared many choice dishes and wonderful offering. And then he invited Kassapa Buddha and the Sangha to come for the meal. And so after the meal was served, the Blessed One sat and King Kasi took a lower seat and basically spoke with the Buddha. And he said, "Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One accept from me as residence for the rains in Benares. That will be helpful for the Sangha." And then the Buddha said, "Enough, King, my residence for the rains has already been provided for." And then a second and a third time, King Kiki of Kasi said, "Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares. That will be helpful for the Sangha." And the Buddha said, "Enough, King, my residence for the rains has already been provided for." So then the king thought, "The Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, does not accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares." And he was very disappointed and sad. Then he said, "Venerable Sir, have you a better supporter than I am?" And then the Buddha said, "I have, great king. There is a market town called Vepalinga where a potter named Ghatikara lives. He is my supporter, my chief attendant and supporter. Now you, great king, thought, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, does not accept from me a residence for the rains in Benares, and you were very disappointed and sad. But the potter Ghatikara is not, and will not be so. The potter Ghatikara has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. He abstains from killing living beings, from taking what is not given, from misconduct in sensual pleasures, from false speech, and from wine, liquor, and intoxicants, which are the basis for negligence. He has perfect confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and he possesses the virtues loved by the noble ones. He is free from doubt about suffering, about the origin of suffering, about the cessation of suffering, and about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. He eats only 1 meal a day. He observes celibacy. He is virtuous, of good character. He has laid aside gems and gold. He has given up gold and silver. He does not dig the ground for clay using a pick with his own hand. What is left over from embankments or thrown up by rats, he brings home in a carrier. When he has made a pot, he says, "Let anyone who likes set down some selected rice or selected beans or selected lentils, and let him take away whatever he likes." He supports his blind and aged parents. Having destroyed the 5 lower fetters, he is one who will reappear spontaneously in the Pure Abodes, and there attain final Nibbana without ever returning from the world. So these noble qualities of Ghatikara are very important. Firstly, he keeps the precepts, so he is virtuous. He has perfect confidence in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, so it's unshakable confidence, unshakable conviction, and therefore he is free of doubt, because if your confidence and conviction towards Buddha Dhamma Sangha shakes, then you will have doubt about the noble truths. But in the case of Ghatikara, what is very evident from Kassapa Buddha's explanation, extolling the virtues of Ghatikara, is that he is free from doubt and he has this perfect confidence in Buddha Dhamma Sangha. What is also interesting is that he only eats in 1 part of the day. He observes celibacy, and of course he is virtuous, of good character. So he is someone who is a sappurisa. Again, it is confirmed. What is also most interesting is skillful livelihood. We see from the account that Kassapa Buddha says is that Ghatikara does not touch money. So he no longer uses money, he's laid it aside and he doesn't store it. And instead, when he does his pottery, he doesn't dig the ground, so he's not harming any living beings. He just picks up the leftovers from the embankments and what's thrown over. And that's what he brings back to use for his pottery. And he doesn't charge for the pottery that he puts. He just leaves it outside of his home, and then he tells people to offer whatever they can. So it's usually food items. And that's quite remarkable when you think about what we do. And remember, he's a lay householder, so he did not ordain because he was looking after his blind and aged parents. Now, if you look at ourselves, when you think about what is incomplete about the supramundane right livelihood, is we still touch money, and we also hoard the money, and we demand wages and salaries, and we are driven very much by the gain of money in order to function in our lives. But you look at the example of Ghatikara and you look at what he represents, it's something very, very unique and very remarkable. So we're not saying that we must do this, and it's particularly difficult for householders to do this, but he is essentially living the life of a samana as a householder, and to a greater extent than any of us. Now, there might be people who are living 10 precepts as lay householders. Ghatikara is the example for this. He's someone that is living the 10 precepts. So he has renounced money, and clearly he possesses a lot of noble qualities, and he has destroyed the 5 lower fetters. So we know this to be someone who has a path and fruit of non-return. Continuing with the Buddha's account in this Ghatikara Sutta, Kassapa Buddha then gives some examples by stating, "On one occasion when I was living in Vepalinga, it being morning, I dressed, and taking my bowl and outer robe, I went to the potter GhatikāRA'S parents and asked them, 'Where has the potter gone, please?' 'Venerable sir, your supporter has gone out, but take rice from the cauldron and sauce from the saucepan and eat.' I did so and went away. Then the potter GhatikāRA went to his parents and asked, 'Who has taken rice from the cauldron and sauce from the saucepan, eaten and gone away?' 'My dear, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, did.' Then the potter GhatikāRA thought, 'It is a gain for me. It is a great gain for me that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has so much trust in me.' And rapture and happiness never left him for a half month or his parents for a week. On another occasion, when I was living in Vepalinga, it being morning, I dressed, and taking my bowl and outer robe, I went to the potter GhatikāRA'S parents and asked them, 'Where has the potter gone, please?' 'Venerable sir, your supporter has gone out, but take some porridge from the vessel and sauce from the saucepan and eat.' I did so and went away. Then the potter Ghatikara went to his parents and asked, "Who has taken the porridge from the vessel, and sauce from the saucepan, eaten and gone away?" "My dear, the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, did." Then the potter Ghatikara thought, "It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has so much trust in me." And rapture and happiness never left him for a half month or his parents for a week. So when you hear this account from Kassapa Buddha, you actually think to yourself, would I be able to do that? Because essentially it's like someone coming into your house without you personally giving permission and coming in and taking food. Now, what's remarkable is that this is something that has been offered by Ghatikara in the past to Kassapa Buddha, that you are free to come and take food. And there is that trust in Kassapa Buddha that Ghatikara would not make bad karma with him, would not think the worst of him, and would not go down in his mind because of it. Instead, if you listen to the thoughts of Ghatikara, he sees it as a gain. He sees it as something of trust given by Kassapa Buddha to come even when he's not at home to take food. If you think about that, the quality that he is demonstrating is a lack of stinginess, a great or immense quality of generosity, but also much conviction towards the Buddha and a willingness to honor, respect, venerate, and support the Buddha. And maybe that is why he is known as Aga Upathak, like the chief attendant and supporter follower of Kassapa Buddha. It's this kind of quality. So these are two examples when it comes to taking food from GhatikāRA'S house when he's not there. Then the Buddha goes on to give one final example, and he states, "On another occasion, when I was living at Vepalinga, my hut leaked. Then I addressed the bhikkhus thus, 'Go, bhikkhus, and find out if there is any grass at the potter GhatikāRA'S house.' The bhikkhus then returned and said, 'Venerable sir, there is no grass at the potter GhatikāRA'S house. There is a grass thatch on his roof.' And then the Buddha says, 'Go, bhikkhus, and remove the grass from the potter GhatikāRA'S house.' They did so. Then the potter GhatikāRA'S parents asked the bhikkhus, 'Who is removing the grass from the house?' And then they replied, 'Sister, the hut of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, is leaking.' And they replied, 'Take it, venerable sirs, take it, dear ones.' Then the potter GhatikāRA went to his parents and asked, 'Who has removed the grass from the roof?' The bhikkhus did, my dear. The hut of the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, is leaking. Then the potter GhatikāRA thought, 'It is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, has so much trust in me.' And the rapture and happiness never left him for half a month or his parents for a week. Then that house remained 3 whole months with the sky for a roof, and yet no rain came in. Such is the potter GhatikāRA." So what we can see from this particular account is it goes even further, the level of trust that the Buddha has with GhatikāRA and how it is viewed by GhatikāRA. And isn't it remarkable if someone was to come to your house and simply remove the tiles from your roof, like your roof tiles, or remove part of the drainage system for their own, you would not necessarily wish to give that. Most of us, what we do have is avasa macharya, so we have stinginess with our dwellings. So it's not just stinginess in terms of enabling or allowing people to come and stay, but stinginess if someone were to ask for something to be borrowed from our house or taken from our house because theirs is leaking or damaged or something like that. And if you really think deeply about it, whether it is a friend even, a Dhamma friend, or whether it is a Dhamma teacher, if they were to come and ask you, it's interesting what comes up in the mind. You know, this is our way to connect to the mind of Ghatikāra, that he simply rejoiced each time that he comes back and something has been offered to the Buddha in his absence. He rejoices, and then for half a month he has rapture, and his parents for at least a week. So this is something that when you have that level of generosity, and of course in this case it's to Kassapa Buddha, then you would imagine that if you have so much conviction, no doubt about the Buddha, no doubt about his teachings, no doubt about the Sangha of ordained monks and nuns, then you would experience that rapture. But it is very useful for us to contemplate it, to put ourselves in Ghatikāra's position when it comes to our food stores, what we are prepared to offer, our homes in terms of the quality of stinginess that we may or may not have, and to look at Ghatikāra's example, because there's something about loosening the grip on our worldly possessions, because we strive so hard in conventional society to gain, but as we know that gain, honor and praise is not something that helps the spiritual path. It's a very worldly thing. So when you look at Ghatikāra's example of just freely being able to give, and then also taking higher precepts in not touching money and stuff, as a layperson, this is a very high practice. And so when you reflect on it, it really triggers something in the mind and makes you think about the different aspects of practice that are uprooting greed, hatred and delusion. And so when we can loosen the grip on our material possessions, that goes a very long way to being able to uproot, particularly greed, and then hatred and delusion. And so there's something very powerful in Ghatikāra's example, and the way that Kassapa Buddha extols his noble qualities. It's very heartwarming, but also very, very inspirational. If you hear this and you don't immediately connect, it's quite important, I think, to just spend some time turning over in your mind Ghatikāra's example and then putting yourself in his place and seeing what is it like in your mind if you were to have to do the same, and what is it that is blocking you, and what is it that is blocking the path in many respects, because our foundational quality is generosity and then virtue. They go hand in hand, and then the path develops from there. So it's very useful to do that exercise. And it's not about practically doing it. So this is not calling on you to give everything away or give away things from your roof or anything like that. But it's part of contemplating one's qualities to see how do they match up and what can be shifted in terms of our own spiritual qualities and move in the direction of Ghatikāra the potter. Because as we can see, he's a non-returner. He has developed his practice to that extent, and after his time, in the Aviha realm, he's probably developed even more. So he's probably still around if he hasn't actually passed away. When you go to the questions of King Milinda, he had a question for Venerable Nagasena about the potter's roof. So his question was, Venerable Nagasena, this too has been said by the Blessed One. Ghatikāra the potter's dwelling place remained, the whole of it, for 3 months open to the sky, and no rain fell upon it. But on the other hand, it is said, rain fell on the hut of Kassapa the Tathagata. How was it, Venerable Nagasena, that the hut of the Tathagata, the root of whose merits were so widely spread, got wet? One would think that a Tathagata should have the power to prevent that. If Nagasena Ghatikāra the potter's dwelling was kept dry when it was open to the sky, it cannot be true that a Tathagata's hut got wet. But if it did, then it must be false that the potter's dwelling was kept dry. This too is a double-edged problem now put to you, which you have to solve. So clearly King Milinda is working out in his mind, how is it possible that Kassapa Buddha has rain falling on his hut, and then for 3 months Ghatikāra's hut without a roof was dry? So Venerable Nagasena answers this really nicely. He says, both quotations you have made, O King, are correct. Ghatikāra the potter was a good man, beautiful in character, deeply rooted in merit, who supported his old and blind mother and father. And when he was absent, the people, without so much as asking his leave, took away the thatch from his dwelling to roof in with it the hut of the Tathagata. Then, unmoved and unshaken at his thatch being thus removed, but filled rather with a well-grounded and great joy, the like of which cannot be found, an immeasurable bliss sprang up in his heart at the thought, may the Blessed One, the Chief of the world, have full confidence in me, and thereby did he obtain merit which brought forth its good result even in this present life. What Venerable Nagasena is saying is that, having offered with a very pure mind and heart his roof to the Buddha, even after it was taken, endorsing that action by the bhikkhus and the people who had taken his roof, and having full confidence in the Buddha, having trust in him, he gained merit. And so it was his good fortune that no rain fell, even though he didn't have a roof. And then Venerable Nagasena goes on and says, and the Tathagata, O king, was not disturbed by that temporary inconvenience of the falling rain. Just, O king, as Sineru, the king of the mountains, moves not, neither is shaken by the onslaught of innumerous gales, just as the mighty ocean, the home of the great waters, is not filled up, neither is disturbed at all by the inflow of innumerable great rivers, just so, O king, is the Tathagata unmoved at temporary inconvenience. So whether it rains or not on the Tathagata's roof, it doesn't really matter. So that's the first thing that we should always remember, that these inconveniences is not something that the Buddha takes action because he's bothered by it. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So the next part is what is quite interesting as well. So Venerable Nagasena says, and that the rain fell upon the Tathagata's hut happened out of consideration for the great masses of the people. For there are two circumstances, O king, which prevent the Tathagatas from themselves supplying by creative power any requisite of which they may be in need. And what are the two? Men and devas, by supplying the requisites of a Buddha, on the ground that he is a teacher worthy of gifts, will thereby be set free from rebirth in states of woe. And lest others should find fault, saying, they seek their livelihood by working of miracles. If, O king, Sakka had kept that hut dry, or even Brahma himself, even then that action would have been faulty, wrong, and worthy of censure. For people might then say, these Buddhas, by their dexterity, befool and lord it over the world. That is the reason why such action would have been better left undone. The Tathagatas, O king, do not ask for any advantage, and it is because they ask for nothing they are held blameless. And then King Milinda says, very good, Nagasena, that is so, and I accept as you say. So the Buddha, in this case, he does not perform miracles himself to fix the problem, because in doing so, he would prevent other people from making merit, and also to be able to uproot themselves in terms of being free from rebirth into lower planes of existence. And also, if they were to misuse their spiritual powers, then they could be besmirched or reproached by saying that they're fooling people in the world and they're seeking their livelihood through psychic abilities and supernormal powers. And so in that way, they don't take any advantage from the world. It has to be cleanly offered. It's an act of generosity. So when we read this particular aspect, when we actually look into what Venerable Nagasena answers in terms of King Milinda's question, and it's a question we might have, is that it offers us a different perspective on the Tathagata's mind, and also to reinforce where Ghatikara the potter is at in terms of his noble qualities. We can conclude our look at this Ghatikara Sutta with the final episode, which is where King Kiki of Kasi offers a gift to Ghatikara. So the king says, it is a gain for the potter Ghatikara, it is a gain for him that the Blessed One Kassapa, accomplished and fully enlightened, relies on him thus. Then King Kiki of Kasi dispatched to the potter Ghatikara 500 cartloads of red rice stored in the sheaf, and also source materials to go with it. Then the king's men went to the potter Ghatikara and told him, Venerable sir, there are 500 cartloads of red rice stored in the sheaf, and also source materials to go with it, dispatched to you by King Kiki of Kasi. Please accept them. The potter Ghatikara then says, the king is very busy and has much to do. I have enough. Let this be for the king himself. So Ghatikara doesn't accept the 500 cartloads of red rice. And what's interesting about his statement is that he says that the king is very busy and has much to do. So he's actually referencing that the king has lots of duties and therefore may need that food. Whereas in the case of Ghatikara, he is not so busy, he has less to do, and he has enough. He has few wishes. When you're easily satisfied, you have few wishes, you have contentment. And so it's from this reasoning that he has contentment, he has enough, that he rejects the king's offer. And so he sends the carts back. It's really simply that he lives a very simple life. He has those metta qualities, easily satisfied, contented. And as a noble being who's a householder, he would probably think he can make enough from his skillful livelihood and make enough to support his parents and make offerings to the Buddha. And I suppose the other aspect to it is that he's not seeking gain, honor, and praise. So if you use the example of Devadatta that we looked at from one of the Poya sessions, one of the Upasaka Dhamma sessions, we looked at Devadatta, who was getting 500 cartloads of similar foods and choice delicacies from Prince Ajatasattu, and he was delighting in it, getting quite infatuated or intoxicated with being honored by Prince Ajatasattu. Whereas in contrast, you see Ghatikara the potter, he is not intoxicated by this. So again, another very good example of the contrast between someone like Ghatikara the potter versus Devadatta, who actually declined in his practice and eventually, out of jealousy and envy of the Buddha, he went down to the Avicii hells. So very good example that Ghatikara the potter sets. When we come to the chronicles or the life of Gotama Buddha, when he first renounces the kingdom, the palace, he actually reflects on himself in terms of his clothing, and he realizes that they're not appropriate for the life of an ascetic. And Ghatikara, a deva from the Pure Abodes, he comes down seeing his old friend and realizes that he's renounced life and sees the dukkha of birth, aging, sickness and death, and so that he's gone forth for noble renunciation. And so when he sees this, he comes down and he offers the 8 requisites. So he offers the upper robe, the big robe, the lower robe, and a girdle. So those are the 4 requisites that are close to the body. And then he offers a needle and thread, some kind of knife for making teeth cleaning sticks and for peeling sugarcane. Then he offers a bowl with its bag and a water strainer. So the 4 external requisites are also offered. And so having offered that, Ghatikara is said to have taken the garments that were previously worn and he threw them up into the sky. And in the Akanita Pure Abode, a Dusa Chaitya was erected, and it was 12 yojanas in size and finished with various kinds of gems. And the garments were kept in reverence. So what's interesting about this, it's only when Sujata, after the Buddha's enlightenment, when she offered milk rice, this is when that bowl disappeared, the bowl that Ghatikara had offered, and the one that Sujata offered was taken as the alms bowl. So these are very wondrous things that we can't fully fathom, but these are what's told in terms of the life of Gotama Buddha. And we see how Ghatikara plays quite a significant and important role in Gotama Buddha's life. We know from the Ghatikara Sutta in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 1, discourse number 50, and the exact same sutta also appears in Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 2, discourse number 24. We know that Ghatikara visits Gotama Buddha to tell him about the bhikkhus that have been reborn into the Aviha realm. And so he is dwelling in the Pure Abodes, the Suddhavasa. And so Ghatikara gives a similar account of his time during Kassapa Buddha. He says, "In the past I was the potter, Ghatikara in Vebalinga. I supported my mother and father, then as a lay follower of Buddha Kassapa. I abstained from sexual intercourse. I was celibate, free of carnal ties. I was your fellow villager. In the past I was your friend. I am the one who knows these 7 liberated bhikkhus, who with lust and hatred utterly destroyed have crossed over attachment to the world." And then the Buddha confirms this and says, "Just so it was at the time, as you say, O Bhagava. In the past you were the potter, Ghatikara in Vebalinga. You supported your mother and father then as a lay follower of Buddha Kassapa. You abstained from sexual intercourse. You were celibate, free of carnal ties. You were my fellow villager. In the past you were my friend." And then it says, "Such was the meeting that took place between those friends from the past, both now inwardly developed bearers of their final bodies." So this last statement actually implies that Ghatikara is now an arahant. He is inwardly developed. Normally, when you are developed, it means that you have completed the path. It's while you are still developing, you still need to make progress on the path. You're still a trainee. Whereas if you're developed, then you are an arahant. In many ways, when you see this meeting between the two, after hearing the story during the time of Kassapa Buddha between Ghatikara and Jotipāla, and you see them meeting now in this way, it's very heartwarming, and much joy comes to the mind when you see such was the meeting that took place between these friends from the past. It's very joyful. We can end our session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you well. Teruan Saranai.